They didn't even say my name. Just, tell her not to come. It was 4:47 a.m. when the call came. The phone lit up on my nightstand, and I fumbled for my glasses, heart already in my throat. A baby was coming. My daughter, my only child, was in labor, and I'd been waiting for this moment with the kind of hope that you fold into corners of your heart so no one sees how much it matters. But it wasn't her voice I heard. It was him. Calm. Clipped. "She's in surgery," he said. "They had to act fast. The baby's okay. But, look, she doesn't need stress right now. Please don't come. Just stay home." And then the line went dead. My hands were still shaking when I set the phone back down. I stared at the wall for a long moment, the pale green paint washed in early dawn shadows, before pulling the crocheted blanket from the chair beside me. Pink, soft, delicate. I'd spent hours on it, quiet afternoons with the radio low, yarn slipping through fingers grown slow with age. It was meant to be her first gift from me. Something warm to say, "You're not alone." I didn't change clothes. I just pulled on the old gray sweater I kept by the door, the one with the worn elbows and the scent of lavender from too many winters. I tucked the blanket under my arm and walked to the bus stop without even checking the schedule. Because mothers go, we go, even when we're not asked, even when we're told not to. By the time the hospital came into view, tall and sterile, bathed in the quiet blue of morning, I'd already read his message 3 times. "She's okay, but please don't come. She needs calm, not stress." Stress. That was the word he used, like I was a disruption, a loose wire, a burden. I didn't reply. What could I say that wouldn't sound like begging? What could I say that wouldn't make it worse? Instead, I sat. There was a bench tucked to the side of the emergency entrance, half shadowed by a bare winter tree. The kind of place no one noticed unless they needed to cry, or smoke, or both. I sat there, the pink blanket still folded in my lap, my hands wrapped tight around it, as if the softness could keep me from unraveling. Across the way, people came and went, young fathers with balloon bouquets, grandmothers holding toddlers by the hand, nurses moving with practiced purpose. Laughter floated from the revolving doors. Somewhere, a baby cried. I closed my eyes and remembered the sound of her first cry, 33 years ago, in a delivery room where no one had waited for me. Just a nurse with kind eyes and cold hands. That night, alone and aching and stitched into silence, I had promised myself if I ever have a daughter, she won't do this alone. I will be there. And yet, here I was, outside, watching, waiting, unwanted. A nurse stepped out to throw something away, and I stood before I could stop myself. "Excuse me," I said softly. Could you just let her know I'm here? I won't come in. She paused, looking at my face, at the blanket, at the hope that was barely holding itself upright. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes soft. "Visiting is restricted today. Spouses only." I nodded, tried to smile, failed. She went back inside. The door clicked shut. By 9 the sky had brightened, but the cold hadn't lifted. I pulled my coat tighter. Still, I didn't leave, because someone should wait for her, even if she never knew, even if I never saw the baby, or held her, or whispered the lullaby I'd been rehearsing in my head every night for weeks, even if my name wasn't on a list, or a bracelet, or a whiteboard inside a room labeled Mother. I was still her mother, and I had come. The hospital loomed ahead, all clean lines and quiet glass. I sat there on the bench, coat buttoned to the chin, blanket still cradled in my arms. I'd watched 4 sets of visitors go in, each one waved through by a polite nod at the front desk. Laughter echoed every time the automatic doors parted. A cluster of pink balloons bounced against the ceiling. I didn't try to follow them. I didn't ask again. Instead, I watched the sun inch its way across the sidewalk tiles, warming nothing. It was just past 9 when I saw him. Eli, my son-in-law, step out through the side entrance near the ambulance bay. He moved quickly, as always, shoulders tight, phone pressed to one ear. He wore a navy coat I'd bought him for Christmas 3 years ago. I remember the way he thanked me then, polite, brief, distracted. I hadn't seen him wear it since. He walked toward the corner of the building, away from the doors. I knew that look, the need for 5 minutes, for breath, for nicotine. He thought no one would see him there. He didn't see me at first. But then he turned. His eyes met mine. A beat passed. His steps slowed. He pulled a cigarette from his mouth, held it at his side, like maybe if he hit it, I'd disappear. "Mary," he said after a moment, his voice wrapped in guilt and something else. Annoyance, maybe, or worse, pity. "You shouldn't have come." He didn't move closer, just stood there, one foot still turned towards the hospital doors. "I know," I said, quieter than I meant to. "I just wanted to make sure she was all right." "She is," he replied quickly, like a transaction. "They're still monitoring. She's resting now." I nodded. He looked at the blanket in my arms, his jaw tensed. "Look," he said, scratching at the back of his neck. "It's just, there's a lot happening. The nurse said only spouses today, and Em really needs things calm right now. We don't want her upset." "I wouldn't upset her," I said, surprised at how soft my voice came out. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, toward the entrance. Then he exhaled hard and turned back. "I should get back," he said. "Of course," I murmured. And then, without another word, he disappeared inside, the door sealing behind him with a hiss. I was left alone on the bench again, with nothing but the sound of passing cars and the distant buzz of fluorescent lights humming above the awning. I looked down at the blanket. My fingers were shaking now, though the cold had nothing to do with it. Time passed strangely after that. The world around me kept moving in cheerful loops. Families bustling, doors sliding, phones chirping with congratulations. I sat still. At one point, a young couple passed me. He holding a stuffed giraffe, she cradling a sleeping newborn. They didn't notice me. Why would they? She looked so young, barely out of her 20s, if that. But the way she looked at that baby, the way she leaned her cheek down, brushing it against the tiny cap. It split me open. I had once held my daughter like that. I remember one night, when Emily was barely 3 weeks old, she had a fever that wouldn't break. I sat in the rocking chair with her all night long, whispering to her forehead, her tiny chest rising too fast. I remember thinking, take mine, give her my strength, just let her sleep. Now, I wasn't even allowed to knock on the door. At noon, I finally stood. My legs ached from sitting. The bench had left a faint, wet imprint on the back of my skirt, and I could feel the cold seeping into my knees. I walked around the corner of the building, hoping movement might quiet the storm inside me. A small courtyard wrapped around the east wing of the hospital, half paved, half landscaped, with tired shrubs and a dry fountain in the middle. There was a family sitting near the far edge, a woman my age, laughing softly with a boy of maybe 8 or 9. Her daughter, likely, sat beside her, scrolling through her phone, but smiling every so often. The child offered his grandmother a bite of sandwich, and she took it with a theatrical grimace that made him giggle. I looked away before I could see more. It was no one's fault, really. People live differently now. Families don't stay close the way they used to. We're all so polite about it. I'll call you soon. Let's plan something. Next time, Mom. Next time. But the next time keeps moving further out, like a dock swallowed by the tide. Back inside the building, the elevator chimed and released another Group 2 men holding pink gift bags, a teenager with flowers, a woman with a stroller. All of them with names on the visitor list, all of them allowed. I stood by the entrance just long enough to see another nurse glance up at me, then look quickly away. Invisible. That's what I'd become. Not out of cruelty, out of convenience. Eventually, I returned to my bench. My hips protested, but I sat anyway. There was nowhere else to go. I opened the top flap of my purse and pulled out a small zippered pouch inside, a photograph, soft around the edges. Me and Emily, in front of the old apartment on Oak Street. She was 7, missing a front tooth, hair in pigtails, her tiny hand clutched around 2 plastic barrettes I'd let her buy with her own quarters. I remembered how she'd danced in place while I snapped the picture. That night, she'd insisted on sleeping in my bed, scared of the wind. I held her until she snored, little body curled into mine like I was the only safe thing in the world. How quickly we become strangers to our own children. A voice startled me, a nurse again coming out for a break. She smiled, nodded, tossed something into the trash. "You waiting for someone?" she asked. I hesitated. "My daughter," I said. "She's upstairs. Just had her baby." "Oh," she smiled brightly. "Congratulations." I tried to smile back. "Thank you." "You know, you can probably check in at the main desk," she offered. "They might make an exception." I shook my head. "They've already said no." She looked like she might say more, but instead gave a quiet nod and went back inside. I stared at the doors long after they closed. They could see me. They just didn't want to. At some point, the rain began. Not a downpour, nothing dramatic, just a soft, indifferent drizzle. The kind that settles in and stays. I moved beneath the awning, clutching the pink blanket tighter to my chest as I watched the wind scatter leaves across the pavement. It wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the stillness. No one had come to find me. No calls, no texts. My phone sat in my bag like a stone. At home, the kettle would have clicked off by now. I always boiled water at noon, even if I didn't drink the tea. It was just a rhythm, something left to hold on to. Boil water, fold the dish towel, check the porch, sweep the back step. I wondered if Emily remembered how we used to take tea together when she was little. Back before playdates had to be arranged, before she stopped holding my hand in parking lots. I used to pour it into her plastic teacup and pretend it was royal service. Now I'm not even allowed through a hospital door. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing the frayed edge of a tissue I'd folded days ago. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Maybe just to have something in my hands. I glanced down at the blanket again. That blanket had once sat on the arm of my sofa, draped with care. For weeks, I worked on it, stitch after stitch, evening after evening, the pattern imprinted in my fingertips. I imagined her wrapping the baby in it. I imagined her smile, her voice. "You made this?" I imagined being thanked. I imagined being seen. Now it sat silent in my lap, damp at the corners, unused, unwanted. I pulled my coat tighter and watched the revolving doors spin again. Another visitor entered. I didn't try. I didn't stand. I didn't even hope. Hope has manners. It waits. Then it excuses itself when no one makes room. I thought of my house small, how quiet, predictable. I used to find peace in its order. These days, it just made me feel tired. No one drops by anymore. The phone rings less. Groceries last longer because I've stopped cooking full meals. What's the point when there's no one to say, at the first bite? I used to make roast on Sundays. Emily loved the carrots, soft and sweet, browned just right. But the last time she visited, months ago, she pushed her plate gently aside. "We're doing low carb now, Mom," she said, without looking up from her phone. "Too much sugar in root vegetables. Too much sugar in carrots. Imagine that." I nodded. "Of course." Next visit, I served a salad. She barely touched it. "You didn't have to fuss," she said. So the time after that, I didn't. She didn't notice. And still, I set the table for two. Still put out the cloth napkins, the ones with the tiny embroidered tulips I'd stitched years ago while waiting in hospital lobbies during her tonsil surgery, her appendix, her sprained ankle from the school play. I don't even know why I still fold them. Some things become rituals. You do them not because they matter to others, but because they're the last proof that you once did. The blanket in my lap sagged slightly, its weight now more than yarn. I lifted it, smoothed it again, folded it once more. That motion, at least, I still understood. Tuck, fold, hold. It had taken me 6 weeks to finish it. My fingers aren't what they used to be, stiff in the mornings and slow to cooperate. But I kept going, even unwrapping and redoing entire rows when the pattern slipped. I told myself she'd love it. I even imagined it hanging over the nursery chair, draped lovingly in all those Instagram-perfect photos they'd probably take. Funny. She hadn't mentioned the blanket once. Not when I brought it up a month ago. Not when I offered to drop it off. She'd said, "Oh, we've got plenty of swaddles already." Like it was just another item. Another redundancy. Another part of me that didn't fit their world anymore. I stayed outside the hospital through the afternoon. The drizzle stayed with me like a companion that didn't ask questions. By 3 p.m., my legs ached. My back throbbed in that familiar way that says, "Sit now or regret it later." But there was nowhere softer to go, so I stayed still. A few nurses came and went. A man brought out a cart of trash. A mother walked by with her daughter, holding a foil balloon that said, "Welcome, baby." None of them saw me. I could have been a statue. It's strange how quietly we become background. At first, you think you're part of the picture. Then one day, you realize you're the frame meant to support, never to be seen. They don't mean harm. That's what I tell myself. They're just busy. They've got work and appointments and schedules. And I've become a slot in the week. A maybe. A backup plan. Not malicious. Just optional. Once, when Emily was 13, she wrote me a card on Mother's Day. Handmade, covered in glitter and hearts. The kind that flakes all over the table. Inside, in her crooked, looping script, she'd written, "You're always there, even when I don't say thank you. I know, I love you, Mom. I kept it on the fridge for years. It faded in the sun, the corners curled. When I moved to the new house, I found it in a drawer. I almost threw it away. Almost. Now it's in a box under my bed with her baby shoes and the bracelet from the hospital the day she was born. The pink one. Baby girl Taylor. I remember holding her for the first time. How she blinked at me like I was the first thing she ever saw. I wonder if she ever looks at me now. The wind picked up slightly. I pressed the blanket closer again, still folded, still unused. It felt heavier now. Not just in my arms, in my chest, in my ribs. I thought about what it meant to make something that would never be used. To give love no one wanted. To show up and not be allowed in. But I stayed. Because someone should. Because love doesn't vanish just because it's invisible. Because 33 years ago, I promised she'd never be alone. Even if I had to wait outside. Even if the blanket stayed folded. Even if I became just another coat under an awning. It wasn't always like this. There was a time clear as sunlight on water when I was her whole world. I can still see it now, like an old reel playing quietly in the back of my mind. Not faded, not grainy, just soft. The kind of memory that glows at the edges. Emily was 4. It was late fall, just before Thanksgiving. The leaves had already turned, brittle and bright, the kind that crackled under your boots. We were living in the little rental on Sherwood Lane then, just the two of us, and the drafty windows, and the heater that clanged like an old bell. She had a fever that wouldn't break. I remember how her cheeks flushed deep red, her little arms burning under the thermometer's beep. I called the pediatrician 3 times in one night, and they finally told me, gently, to keep her hydrated and monitor the temperature. Come in only if it spiked. I didn't sleep, not for 40 hours. Instead, I sat beside her twin bed with its faded quilt blue with white clouds. Her favorite. I held a cold cloth to her forehead, hummed the lullaby my mother used to sing to me, and whispered stories to distract her from the discomfort. At one point, sometime between night and dawn, she opened her eyes just wide enough and rasped, "You're still here, Mommy." I nodded, brushed her damp hair from her forehead. "I'll always be here, baby." She smiled. Then her tiny hand reached toward mine, not quite connecting, and fell gently against the blanket. That moment, her fingers brushing the edge of that quilt. I've never forgotten it, not in all the years since. I still have that quilt, tucked in the cedar chest at the end of my bed, a little worn now. A few threads coming loose around the corners, but the clouds are still there. Faded, yes, but whole. I thought about that quilt as I sat outside the hospital, pink yarn still cradled in my lap. How many hours had I poured into both? One of cloth, the other of wool. Both made from the same thread. Really love expressed in the only language I've ever truly known. Doing. Stitching. Staying, waiting. There was another memory, different time, different ache. She was 10. Her school had put on a Thanksgiving play, something about pilgrims and turkeys, the kind of event where kids forgot their lines and parents cried anyway. She played a tree. Yes, a tree. No lines, no costume, but a cardboard trunk and a crown of yellow leaves taped to a headband. But she stood tall, arms outstretched, face shining with pride. I sat in the front row, camera in hand, clapping louder than anyone when her name was called. She saw me, waved, beamed. Afterward, she ran into my arms, wrapping herself tight around my waist. "You came. she whispered. Of course I came, I whispered back. I wouldn't miss it. That headband is still in my top drawer. The tape's gone brittle, but the yellow paper leaves are intact. I almost brought it with me today. Silly thought, I know. But I needed to remember what it felt like to be wanted. Even in her teenage years, when things got hard, when the hormones made her sullen and sharp, she still came to me. After slamming doors and rolling eyes, she'd come sit on the edge of my bed, knees pulled to her chest, and whisper, I didn't mean it. I'd pull her close and say, I know. Because I did know. I knew her every heartbeat. I knew her quiet moods and her stubborn joy and the way she twisted her hair when nervous. I knew the little mole behind her left ear, the one I used to kiss goodnight when she was too tired to speak. I knew her better than she knew herself. I don't know when that changed. Maybe it didn't happen all at once. Maybe love doesn't break like glass. Maybe it wears away, like shoreline, quietly, a little more each day, until you look up one morning and the beach is gone. The rain had stopped, but the cold had settled into my joints. I shifted under the awning and watched the puddles ripple in the breeze. Someone inside the hospital laughed. A baby's cry pierced the air for a moment, then quieted. I imagined the scene upstairs, Emily holding her baby, the nurses fluffing pillows, checking monitors, Eli standing beside her, perhaps, offering ice chips or brushing her hair back, the way I once did, and in the corner, maybe a basket, filled with new baby gifts, blankets, onesies, soft rattles. I wondered if mine was there, the pink one, if she'd even seen it, if she knew it came from the woman who stayed up with her through every fever, who clapped for a tree, who whispered stories in the dark and carried her through every storm. I looked down at the blanket in my lap again. Still dry now, still folded, still waiting. And then another memory surfaced, one I hadn't expected. She was 24. It was the night before her wedding. The dress hung from the bedroom door, ivory and soft. Nothing like the poofy creations I'd imagined as a girl, but elegant, beautiful. She had me zip it up so she could practice walking in it. And afterward, we sat on the bed, champagne in mismatched glasses, giggling like old friends. I'm scared, she admitted, voice small. Of what? Of losing myself, she said. Of not knowing how to be a wife and still be me. I reached over, touched her hand. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, I said. The right people will love you as you are. She nodded, then looked me in the eyes and whispered, Promise me you'll always be here, no matter what. I promise. That promise has lived in me ever since. I kept it through the move, through the job changes, through the silence that grew with each passing year. I kept it when visits turned into texts, and texts turned into nothing at all. And I'm keeping it now, even here, even outside, even unseen. Because I loved her first, because I loved her always. Because love, real love, doesn't need a key card or a visitor pass or a thank you. It just shows up. The blanket rested across my knees, pale pink against the gray wool of my coat. I smoothed the corner gently, fingers brushing the edge like I used to brush her hair behind her ear. That was my language. It still is. And if she ever wonders one day, if the baby ever asks, who made this? Maybe, just maybe, someone will say, your grandmother. She waited outside the hospital all day. Maybe that will be enough. Maybe love will leave its mark. even here, even now. It was just after 5 when the hospital lights began to shift, the sterile white softening into something more golden, more tired, the way houses look just before dinner, when the sun slants low across the floor and makes everything feel a little more honest. I'd been sitting outside for over 10 hours. My legs had gone from aching to numb. My back pulsed in quiet rebellion every time I shifted. I hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken. The pink blanket still lay folded in my lap, untouched except for my hands that had never quite stopped holding it, adjusting it, smoothing it. Then, for just a moment, something changed. The glass doors slid open, and this time, Eli stepped out again. He wasn't looking down at his phone. He wasn't moving quickly. His coat was gone, sleeves rolled up, hair a little disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. His face looked pale, tired, and he saw me. This time, he really saw me. He stopped mid-step, and I sat up a little straighter. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me, some small, stubborn part, thought this was it. That maybe he'd walk over, say her name, say the baby's name, say, "She asked for you." That maybe the hours hadn't been for nothing. He hesitated, just for a breath. I lifted my chin. Not much, just enough. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth slightly. Then, from behind him, a nurse called out, "Mr. Levine?" He turned. She was holding a clipboard, gesturing gently. "They're asking for you upstairs." He looked back at me, just for a second. His mouth tightened, like he wanted to say something. Then he gave a nod. Not to me, to the nurse, and walked back through the doors. I didn't move. I didn't cry. But the weight in my chest settled a little deeper, like wet laundry pressing into the sternum. It wasn't anger I felt, not betrayal, not even surprise. It was something quieter, a flicker being gently blown out. The rain had started again, this time barely more than mist. It clung to my coat sleeves, beating on the wool like tiny silver eyes. I pulled the blanket closer, shielding it beneath my coat, careful not to let it touch the ground. It deserved better than the sidewalk. A young woman came outside, probably 25, phone in one hand, a bottle of ginger ale in the other. She wore scrubs light purple with a pattern of ducks, and her hair was pulled into a lopsided bun. She didn't notice me at first. She sat down 2 benches over, let out a long breath, and stretched her neck side to side. After a moment, she caught my eye. She smiled, polite, distant. Then, seeing the blanket, she tilted her head. "Waiting on someone?" she asked softly. I nodded. My daughter had a baby today. "Oh," she smiled, warmer now. "Congratulations. Boy or girl?" "I don't know." I didn't mean to say it. It just slipped out, honest and raw, like a loose thread pulled too hard. Her smile faltered for half a second. "Well, I'm sure she's doing great. It's a big day." I nodded again. She stood soon after, tossed her empty bottle in the bin, and went back inside without another word. At 6:45, the sky had dimmed completely. The parking lot lights buzzed on. Somewhere across the street, a church bell rang for evening mass. I stared at the hospital doors for a long time. They didn't open again. A memory came back then, uninvited, unexpected. Emily's 5th birthday. It had rained that day, too, a stubborn gray drizzle that ruined the plans for the park. She'd cried, face crumpled, arms folded across her chest, in a pout she'd inherited from me. I told her we'd have the party inside, that it would still be fun. She didn't believe me, but I decorated the living room anyway. Streamers from the ceiling fan, balloons taped to the windows. I baked cupcakes vanilla with pink frosting and cut sandwiches into little stars. And when the guests arrived and the candles were lit, she turned to me and whispered, "It's perfect, Mommy. I didn't think it would be, but it is." That's the thing about children. They forgive the weather. They believe in magic. They trust that when you show up, things will be okay. But the years wear that away. Eventually, they stop looking for you at the window. They stop calling you when something breaks. They build their own houses, their own holidays, their own ways. And sometimes they forget that you were the first place they ever felt safe. At 7:05, the sliding doors opened again. A nurse came out, an older woman, maybe my age. She held a clipboard, glanced around the entrance, then turned back inside. Not for me. Still not for me. I stood slowly. My legs protested, knees stiff. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the blanket one last time. Tighter this time, smaller, like maybe that would make it easier to leave behind. I walked toward the front desk. The woman behind the counter was kind-faced, distracted, tapping something into a computer. When she noticed me, she looked up. "Can I help you?" I held the blanket out. "I'm leaving this," I said. "If someone needs it, it's warm." She took it carefully, eyes flicking to the small card I'd tied to the corner. No name, no note, just a tiny crocheted heart I'd stitched into the corner. A signature only I would recognize. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go," she said gently. I nodded once, then turned. Outside, the wind was colder now. I walked slowly to the bus stop, the streetlights stretching long shadows over the pavement. A mother with a stroller waited near the bench. She smiled at me as I approached. The baby tiny, wrapped in a bright yellow blanket, let out a soft sigh, somewhere between a breath and a coo. The mother adjusted the blanket, then caught me watching. "She's only 4 days old," she said. "Our first." "She's beautiful," I replied. She smiled again, proud, tired. I looked away so she wouldn't see my throat tighten. The bus pulled up. I let her board first. I sat near the back, where it was warmest. The seat creaked slightly under my weight. The mother and baby sat a few rows up, close enough to hear the occasional gurgle, the rustle of fabric. I folded my hands in my lap. I didn't think about what I'd say to anyone when I got home. There was no one to say anything to. I didn't think about how long I'd wait before checking my phone again, or whether they'd text at all. I just sat, watched the city pass by in smeared lights and storefronts, all soft focus now. Somewhere in the quiet, I imagined a nurse unfolding the blanket, maybe placing it in the nursery, maybe wrapping a baby who needed something warm, something made with love. Maybe it would reach someone, maybe not. But still, I had come. I let myself in quietly. The door stuck for a second. The wood always swells when it rains, and I had to lean my shoulder into it. A small, familiar sound, that little thunk, followed by the sigh of hinges. Normally, I'd mutter something, maybe laugh to myself. Tonight, I didn't say a word. The house was dark, save for the porch light that spilled faint yellow across the entryway rug. I didn't turn on any others. I walked through the silence like a guest, shoes still on, wet coat hanging heavy off my shoulders. Everything inside was just as I'd left it. The tea towel folded neatly on the oven handle, a half-finished crossword on the table, the china cup I'd set out that morning, still clean, untouched, waiting. I stared at it for a long time. Then I pulled off my coat and hung it on the hook behind the door. The fabric clung to itself, damp and limp, a little darker where the rain had soaked through. It sagged there, dripping slowly onto the floor. I didn't wipe it up. I couldn't. I made it to the kitchen, hand trailing along the wall as if I needed to feel something solid, and sat at the table. No lights, no sound, just me and the shadows and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I rested my hands on the wood surface open palms, flat, still. They looked older than I remembered. Thin skin, blue veins, joints that ached even when I didn't move. Hands that once cradled a newborn, kneaded bread, braided hair, wiped tears. Hands that had offered and offered and offered. Now, they just sat there, like they didn't know what to do anymore. I felt empty in a way I didn't have words for. Not sad. Sadness is sharp. Sadness moves. This was something else. Something heavy and still and deep like the bottom of a well that had long since stopped echoing. No one had texted. No call. No photo. No name for the baby. Not even a message to say she was okay. I wasn't forgotten. I was ignored. There's a difference. Forgotten is an accident. Ignored is a decision. I reached for the kettle out of habit. The switch clicked on, red light glowing like a little eye in the dark. But halfway through, I stopped. I didn't want tea. I didn't want anything. I let it boil, let the steam hiss and rise, and when it clicked off with that final snap, I didn't move. The water cooled inside, undrunk. Across the room, on the hallway wall, was the photo album shelf. I stared at it like it might speak. 3 red binders lined up neatly, spines cracked from user baby years, her school days, the wedding that barely included me. At the end of the row was a yellowed sticky note, a shopping reminder I'd jotted down a week ago. I got up slowly, knees protesting, and walked to it. I peeled off the note and tossed it aside. Then I pulled out the first album, heavy, familiar. I didn't flip through it. I just sat back down with it on my lap, unopened. The weight of it somehow more comforting than the pages inside. That's when I saw it, the blanket. Not the pink one, the blue one, folded neatly at the edge of the couch. The very first baby blanket I ever made. For her, in 1989. Blue and white stripes. Acrylic yarn, slightly uneven on one end, where I hadn't quite figured out tension yet. She used to carry it everywhere, dragged it through dirt, slept with it every night until it was more holes than stitches. But I never threw it away, and now, there it sat, on the edge of the couch, waiting, like some quiet witness. I stared at it, my breath catching. How many things had I made? How many pieces of me had I left behind in drawers, in diaper bags, in memory? And still, it wasn't enough. I lowered my head, rested it on the table. The wood was cool against my cheek. I closed my eyes, and I stayed like that for a long, long time. No crying, just breathing, because even my tears felt spent, like everything else. At some point, the house shifted around me, pipes settling, the wind tapping gently at the window. The rain returned, soft, rhythmic, almost kind, but I didn't move. I couldn't. All I kept thinking was, I waited all day. I sat in the rain. I brought the blanket. I came anyway. And still, I wasn't enough to be let in. Still, I was too much for their version of calm. Too old. Too emotional. Too inconvenient. I thought of her tiny hand in mine all those years ago. The fevers I soothed. The monsters I chased from closets. The cupcakes I decorated with crooked smiles. And now, I wasn't even given the baby's name. That was the moment I felt it, like a thread snapping inside me. A quiet, final giving way. It didn't hurt. It didn't scream. It just let go. Like something in me finally understood. I couldn't keep showing up for a door that never opened. The blue blanket sat quietly in the dark. My hands rested beside it, empty, still. Morning came without ceremony. Gray light filtered through the kitchen window, falling in long, tired stripes across the floor. The house smelled faintly of last night's boiled water and something older dust, perhaps, or memory. I hadn't gone to bed. I'd drifted for a few hours in the chair, the baby album still resting on my lap, unopened. My neck ached, and my hands were stiff from being curled too long in stillness. But something had shifted, not loudly, not like revelation, more like the slow thaw of something frozen deep inside. I stood, moved slowly, each movement deliberate, an old ritual rebuilt. I walked to the sink and filled the kettle again. This time, I stayed with it. I waited for the steam. While the water boiled, I opened the drawer by the fridge and pulled out the tea tin. Not the everyday one, the special one. The one with the label worn off, containing the blend I saved for company I never got. I scooped it gently into the infuser, poured the water, let it steep. Then I set out 1 teacup, just one, and placed it at the table. Across from it, I laid down the photograph, the one of Emily on her 5th birthday, wearing the yellow leaf headband and the widest grin I'd ever seen. Frosting still smudged at the corner of her mouth. I looked at her. Really looked. Not as she is now, grown, distant, polite in the way strangers are polite, but as she was. All that unfiltered love, all that fierce attachment. The little girl who once cried when I was 5 minutes late for pickup. The one who swore she'd live with me forever. I took a breath, deep and slow, and whispered, barely audible. I remember who I was, and I remember who you were. I won't forget. My eyes drifted to the blue blanket on the couch. I walked over to it, lifted it. It was smaller than I remembered, the holes more obvious now. But it held weight, not just physical, history, care, proof. It was the first thing I ever made that mattered. The first thing that said, "You're mine. I'll protect you." And though she didn't carry it anymore, though it hadn't wrapped around her daughter, hadn't been draped over a hospital chair or stuffed in a nursery bag, it still meant something. Not to her, maybe, but to me. I folded it slowly, not like something sacred, but like something finished. A chapter, not erased, but complete. And then, without ceremony, I tucked it into the cedar chest. Let it rest among the other relics of what I'd given, not hidden, but closed. My offering had been made, and I would not keep offering to a silence that didn't answer. I poured the tea, lifted it, warmth spread into my palms, and for the first time in days, I took a full breath. I sat. No music, no television, no distractions, just me, the tea, the photo, and the quiet hum of a morning that didn't ask anything from me. I looked at the sticky note, still clinging to the edge of the refrigerator, yesterday's reminder for eggs and bread. I peeled it off, walked to the hallway, stared at the empty space on the wall beside the photo albums. Then I picked up a pen and wrote, "If she ever asks who came, the answer is, I did." I pressed the note to the wall, firm, centered. Then I stepped back and looked at it, really looked, not through tears, not through longing, but with something steadier, something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like choice. I didn't text her that day, didn't ask for pictures, didn't wait for a call. Let them have their world. Let it spin as it pleased, because mine had just shifted. Not away from love, never from love, but back to me, to the version of myself who knew what she gave. And finally, quietly, believed it was enough. By afternoon, the rain had stopped. The sky stretched wide and pale, that washed-out blue that only appears after a storm, quiet, open, slightly apologetic. I stood at the front window, teacup warm in my hands, and watched the leaves twitch in the breeze. The street was still. A delivery truck rumbled by, a sparrow flitted across the hedge, and somewhere nearby, a dog barked once and gave up. It was the kind of afternoon that doesn't demand anything. And yet, I felt something rise, a pull. Not urgency, not anger, just the soft insistence of a thought that wouldn't leave me alone. Go somewhere, do something, not for them, for me. I washed the teacup, careful as ever, dried it, and placed it back on its hook. Then I walked down the hall. The cedar chest at the foot of my bed creaked as I opened it. Inside, all the familiar things were waiting, the tiny shoes, the kindergarten drawings, the blue blanket I'd just tucked away the night before. But I didn't reach for any of that. Instead, I pulled out the photo album marked 1990, 1995. The years when everything was simpler. The years when I was seen. I slipped it into a canvas tote, then added a small notepad, a pen, and a scarf I hadn't worn in years. Bright teal, with little embroidered birds stitched along the hem. It didn't match anything I owned anymore. But it felt right. At the hall mirror, I paused. My reflection was soft with age, but I didn't flinch. There were lines, yes, and the faintest droop around the mouth. But there was also something else, clarity, maybe, or peace. I tied the scarf, a little crooked, and smoothed my sweater. Then I slipped on my shoes, locked the door behind me, and stepped out into the world. I didn't take the bus. I walked down the same sidewalk where Emily used to ride her tricycle in lopsided circles, past the corner store where we bought popsicles in summer, all the way to the little park on Grayson Street. It wasn't much, a swing set, a few benches, a duck pond that had more algae than ducks, but it was quiet. It was mine, and it was enough. I chose a bench near the water, the one under the sycamore tree that dropped yellow leaves every fall like gentle confetti. I sat, unzipped the tote, opened the album, and for the next hour, I let myself remember. Page by page, I turned through a life I had built with my own 2 hands. Emily with pigtails and missing teeth. Emily at the beach, chasing gulls. Emily wrapped in the blue blanket, asleep in my lap, her mouth open in trust. I ran my fingers over the photos, letting them anchor me, not in sadness, but in truth. I was there. I had mattered, not just then, but now. Because memory isn't a place we visit to mourn. It's a mirror. A gentle one, a quiet one, but honest. Near the back of the album was a photo I'd forgotten. Emily and me at a fall fair, she on my shoulders, a caramel apple in one hand, the other in my hair for balance. We were both laughing. I looked ridiculous, and I looked happy. That photo stayed open on my lap for a long time. People passed the park path now and then, a man with a stroller, a couple walking their dog, a teenager on a bike. No one looked twice at me, but I didn't feel invisible. Not today. I reached into the tote again, pulled out the notepad. On the first page, I began to write. Not to her, to myself. Just a list. A list of what I remembered: the birthdays, the fevers, the late-night drives, the lunchbox notes, the ballet recitals, the tears she never wanted anyone else to see. I wrote them all down, line by line, as if saying, "This happened. I was there. I loved. I stayed." I wrote until my hand cramped, then underlined the last line twice. I showed up. When the sun began to dip, I closed the album, folded the scarf a little tighter, and stood. Before I left, I did one last thing. I tucked the photo of us at the fair Emily on my shoulders, both of us wild with laughter, into the back flap of the notebook. Not to look at again, but to keep, to carry, to remind myself that love doesn't disappear just because it isn't returned the way you hoped. It lives in who you were when you gave it, and that's more than enough. As I walked home, the breeze lifted the ends of the scarf, and for the first time in days, I felt light. Not because anything had changed out there, but because something had changed in here. I had stopped waiting for an apology, stopped waiting to be called, and instead, I had called myself home. Evening settled like a hush, not heavy, not mournful, just soft, like someone laying a quilt over the day. The sun had long since dipped behind the trees, leaving only the amber spill of porch light to guide my way up the steps. My knees ached from the walk, but I didn't mind. It was the ache that comes from moving forward, not the kind that stiffens with standing still. I let myself in. The door no longer resisted me. It opened easily this time, as if even the house had sensed a change. I placed the tote on the entry table and paused there, my fingers brushing the worn handles. The notebook rested inside pages now filled with memories I had claimed back from silence. Not rewritten, not reimagined, just remembered. As they deserved, the hallway stretched quiet before me. The living room bathed in soft shadow. The house had always been quiet, but tonight it felt different. Not hollow, not lonely, just mine. I walked slowly toward the photo shelf. 3 red albums lined the wall, steadfast, waiting. Beside them still hung the sticky note I'd placed that morning, its yellow square catching the light in a way that made it glow like something holy. I reached for it, just to smooth the edges. It had curled slightly, as sticky notes do when they've done their job. But I didn't remove it. Instead, I stepped back, and beneath it, on the shelf itself, I laid the photograph from the park. Emily on my shoulders, caramel apple in hand, our laughter frozen in time. I didn't frame it, didn't polish it, just set it down, like a bookmark, like a quiet flag staked in the soil of memory. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked to the hallway closet, pulled down the sewing box from the top shelf, the one I used to keep beside the sofa when my hands were younger, faster. Inside, beneath the loose buttons and tangled spools, lay the remnants of a project never finished. A pale blue square, barely 6 inches across, the start of what was meant to be another blanket. I lifted it, ran my fingers across the loops. Then I folded it twice and placed it gently on top of the sewing box. A promise paused. A story I didn't need to complete. Not out of bitterness, but release. There are kinds of love that ask for more than we should give, and there is dignity in knowing when to stop reaching. Back in the kitchen, the tea kettle waited patiently on its trivet. The china cup from this morning had dried rings along its rim. I rinsed it, dried it, hung it back on its hook. Every movement was quiet, purposeful, like closing a letter or packing away a dress you no longer fit but still respect. The clock ticked over to 9:42. I turned out the kitchen light, walked back to the hallway, and stood before the wall of albums once more. I read the note again. If she ever asks who came, the answer is, I did. Then, beside it, with care and intention, I placed one last item, the blue baby blanket. Not the new one, pink and folded and left at the hospital. The first one, her first, worn, frayed, full of crumbs and years. I laid it beneath the albums like a foundation stone, a symbol, not of what was lost, but of what remained. Proof that I had been there from the beginning, that my love had weight, and form, and fabric. I didn't say goodbye, not out loud. Goodbyes are loud, messy. They ask for acknowledgement. What I gave tonight was quieter than that. A letting go, a soft hand placed on a memory's shoulder, and a nod that says, you can stay, but I won't wait for you anymore. I turned from the wall, walked down the hall, turned off the porch light, and closed the door behind me. The next morning, the light came through the curtains, soft and gold, like butter on warm toast. It touched the edge of the couch, then the rug, then the hallway wall, just enough to catch the corner of the sticky note. It was still there, a little curled, a little faded, but firm. I rose without rush. No alarms, no plans, no buzzing phone asking anything of me. I brewed tea again, but this time I chose a different cup, one I hadn't used in years. A gift from Emily when she was 8, white porcelain with pink tulips painted along the rim. She'd bought it with her own allowance. Back then, she'd looked up at me and said, "It's so you, Mommy." And it had been, still was. I set the cup on the table and opened the curtains wide. The world outside had changed overnight, just slightly. The air was crisp, the sidewalk damp from last night's rain, the maple tree near the curb tipped in early gold. A woman jogged by with a stroller. A boy on a bicycle rode close behind. I watched them go, then turned away, not with longing, but with peace. I spent the morning tidying, not frantically, not to prepare for anyone, just moving through the rooms as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. I dusted the photo frames, straightened the books, lit a candle that smelled faintly of cedar and rose. In the living room, I fluffed the cushions, then placed the blue blanket across the back of the couch, not tucked away, not hidden in a chest, but right where it belonged, worn, visible, honored. After lunch, I sat in my chair by the window with a needle and thread and the small notebook. Not to mend, not to write, just to rest, to be. The silence wrapped around me, not empty, but full. The kind of silence that lives in churches, libraries, and long walks after hard decisions. It didn't ache anymore. My phone stayed silent, no news, no photos, no baby's name, and yet I smiled, because something in me had turned, not a corner, a page, and on this page I wrote a truth I no longer needed permission to believe. I was a good mother, not perfect, not infallible, but present, steady, real. And when the time came, I showed up even if no one saw me do it. I stood once more, walked down the hall to the photo wall. The sticky note remained, my small yellow truth. Beside it, the old photograph of Emily and me at the fair, and beneath it, the folded blue blanket. The whole history of our love, layered in symbols, visible, unapologetic. I placed one hand on the wall beside it, not to press, not to cling, just to connect. Then I whispered, barely more than breath, "If she ever asks who came, the answer is, I did." And with that, I stepped back and walked away. Not backward, forward, into my day, into myself, free, whole, enough.